So we're here with Rob Shaw, CEO of J-Wing and Epiphany. Previously. From Latitude, started a humble beginnings and ideal standard here in Hull.
Yep.
So I think the best thing for us to start off with today is, can you just tell us about that journey from a systems analyst, ideal standard, to CEO of one of the biggest digital agencies in the country?
Yeah, I'll talk through my humble beginnings. So actually, the ideal standard job came out of a decision not to go to university.
Right.
So I'm Hull born and bred, did my A-levels at Wolverton, and absolutely loved technology, computer science. I wanted to be a software developer straight out of school. Showing my age, but we're going back to 1988. Internet wasn't even invented.
That's the year I was born.
Is it really? Oh God, right, okay, well I know exactly what our age difference is then. And so technology was, in the same way that now it's still hugely important and it can be something that differentiates businesses and people's careers. It was then, but for a different reason. So I wanted to develop software. So I got myself 2 offers, one for studying computer science in Manchester, one studying computer science at Newcastle. I was intending to take the Newcastle place. Back in the day, when you finished your A-levels and you had about 8-12 weeks before you started university, you were allowed to sign on. You were allowed to go to the job centre and say, I'm not at work for the next 3 months, and you could claim unemployment benefit. So I went down to the job centre to sign on, and while I'm queuing to sign on, there is a job card for a computer programmer. And I'm thinking, I'm going to university to study for 3 years to get that job, and it's there now, and it was with Ideal Standard.
Right.
And Ideal Standard had a very large technology department, and it built a lot of its own internal systems. So I applied for it on spec, got the job as a junior programmer, much to my parents' disappointment that I ended up not going to university, started developing, and they really invested in their people. So over a 3-year period where my friends were going to university and learning computer science and coming out with a degree, and they'd programmed in 2 languages. After 3 years, I could program in 16 different languages. And they just trained me on, can you do this? Can you do this? And I just lapped it all up. I had that real desire to learn how to do it. So I did 5 years there, starting as a software developer.
So on that, I think that's a really interesting point on the university in there, because I always grew up and I always thought, get a degree, it's going to set me up so much better for my future career. And I can't deny that I've got a psychology background. I've got a master's in psychology, and that has 100% helped me from a behavioural psychology point of view, especially within marketing, right? But I can't say that I needed all of those 4 years at university to learn what I know now. And I think we've got people in the business at 43 here who are amazing at what they do and haven't been to university. So what's your thoughts on at the moment of a degree over experience? Especially in the current market, how much it costs for people.
I don't think it's one size fits all. Again, back when I was leaving school, university wasn't an automatic expectation straight out of school, because there was less universities. It was harder to get in. It was definitely a point in the job ladder. But some people, and certainly for myself, I kind of already had that maturity that I felt like I could go into a place of work and know what to do, and I would be comfortable enough with people. Don't get me wrong, I was nervous on my first day at work. Some people, I think that 3 years at university, as well as them teaching, learning the vocational skills, do start to develop the life skills and the maturity, and are a much more employable package when they're 21 years old than they might have been when they were 18 years old.
Yeah.
I was just, I suppose, fairly mature for my age. And so at 18, I was quite confident to do that. I was speaking to someone last year at EY who does their graduate apprenticeship scheme. And they were saying that the biggest investment they've had to make to take people on at 18 instead of 21 is the pastoral care that goes with it. It's training people about what it's like to be in the working environment and how you manage your time and how you deal with people and how you deal with conflict. And I think if you can allow that for people and give them an environment where they can learn some of that, because it's not obvious, we learn it through experience, then you don't necessarily have to wait. So I think there's more choices now than there used to be. Same with some of the tech colleges. That not everybody wants to do another 3 years in an academic environment, and not everyone can afford or wants to take the stress of leaving with that loan after 3 years.
Yeah. So off the back of that then is, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's an expensive 3 years if, you know, the main benefit is maturity, is essentially with the conflict management and things like that. So should employers be looking at more that pastoral care of making sure when we're bringing whether it be apprentices on, whether it's been, you know, fresh out of college, you know, making sure that the environment is set up to teach them that as well as the skills that they need to do.
Yeah, and I think you need to do that as an employer, whether bringing on 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds, or even some people that are older than that, is that you shouldn't just assume that everybody is comfortable and confident about what the world of work is going to be like. You know, you know from our Epiphany days, you know, we were incredibly proud of our grad scheme, and we brought people on every year, 4 people every year for an awfully long time, and they've gone on to have amazing careers. I'm hugely proud of that. But not all of them were the finished article when they first started work. No. They needed that coaching and that mentoring and just someone to check in with. So I think it's important that you do give people that opportunity. I was just fortunate that I kind of skipped that stage. So Ideal Standard, 5 years there, programming computers, and then by the time I left, I was an analyst, and I think that was because I have this absolute love of technology, and I can understand it, and I know what benefits it can give, but I really like talking to people. And the skill that I had at Ideal Standard, and if you ever want a baptism of fire, be a teenage computer programmer in a factory environment, because Ideal Standard made bathroom suites, and there were big blokes standing outside kilns making chinaware, and I was teaching them the barcoding system to be able to tell them whether it had got a crack in it or it had a pinhole in it, and they didn't care. I was an inconvenience to them doing their job, but the company needed to know, what's our production rate, how many bathroom suites have we produced, have we sprayed them in white today, have we sprayed them in green today. So being able to convince them or sell them on the reasons why you need to use this technology is hard. And if it doesn't work, you learn about it immediately, because you want user feedback. Is some guy going, my day rate's gone down and I get paid on my day rate because of your technology, you're going to have to improve it. So it really galvanized those skills really quickly about how to deal with people.
So in that instance, essentially, if you do your job and you don't cause them a problem, you're just an inconvenience. If you do your job and cause them a problem,
you're a barrier, and you're not going to survive there. And so that was great. But what I learned was I really liked this middle ground of understanding and implementing the technology, but speaking to people and saying what you're trying to achieve. And you know, we used it as a mantra, saying to clients and customers, what does success look like?
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve here? Recognizing that the amazing piece of technology that you were doing, and in your sense in the marketing environment, this great technique you're using, that's not what the client's buying. The client's buying the end product, the solution to it. So I think I understood that quite quickly. So became a systems analyst and then a project manager, moved from Ideal Standard, that was one of the big technology employers in the area, to Kingston Communications, which was one of the bigger ones. It gave me experience of telecoms, which was obviously growing incredibly quickly. Hugely proud of working for Kingston Communications, only independent telephone company, Magnolia phone boxes. I've grown up on all of that, and I loved it. So that allowed me to get another 5 years of experience running bigger projects. And then I wanted to do more, and that was the thing that led to me having to leave Hull. Right. Because for me to make that next step, I was then in my mid to late 20s, and it's like, right, I want a bigger job. I eventually want to be on the board of a company. There just wasn't enough options in Hull. There just wasn't enough choices for me to make.
So at that point, so you've gone from putting working with the technology, putting that in place, solving solutions, to having that thought of, I want to be on the board of a company, like I want to run that. So was there a moment when you kind of realised actually this is the aspiration now, or has that always been in there?
I think the aspiration has always been there. I've always been ambitious. I've always been extremely competitive. It doesn't matter what I'm doing, whether I'm playing Ludo with my daughter or whether I'm trying to build a company.
You're not letting her win then?
Not a chance. Not a chance. I want to win, and I believe in that attitude. I believe in doing it with integrity, and I believe in doing the right thing, and I believe in honour. And I've said to countless people before, including clients, I was brought up well by my parents. And therefore I've got that value system, and I implement that in business as well. It doesn't stop me being ambitious. So I would deal with directors of companies, with the directors of my company. I can remember, when I first got to meet the chief exec of Kingston Communications in the huge oak panelled boardroom at the top of the building. It's like, my God, this is where decisions happen. And what I realised was I'd met they, because when you're an employee of a company, you talk about they've made this decision and they've decided that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, who's they? That's not a real tangible thing. And what I started to realise was they's just people. It's just other people that outside of work are the same as everybody else. They just happen to have been entrusted with making some of these decisions. And I wanted to be involved in that decision-making process. So I wanted to join a board and I wanted to be an IT director because IT was what I'd learned at the time.
Sorry, I'm keep interrupting.
No.
At that point when you identified they, was there at any point was it, I want to be part of that there when people refer to that there, I want to be there, I want to make those decisions? Was it driven by any, I think I can do that better, or I want that challenge, I want that opportunity to see if I can do that better? Was there anything like that?
I wanted to be master of my own destiny. What I absolutely hated was hearing that a decision had been made, and because I was a person that was closer to the ground going, they haven't thought about this, they haven't thought about that, well, that's not going to work because of this. And sometimes what I've learned over time is, but you don't understand the bigger picture. But I wanted to feel like I was involved. And it's been something that's pervaded my career ever since, is telling people what's going on, having a plan. The first time I ever got a board level role, which was at the next company, which was Ventura, which I'll talk about in a second, I wasn't taken into an office by the MD who'd given me that job and said, right, Rob, now you've joined the board, here's the secret plan. Here's what we don't tell anyone about. I never wanted to be in that kind of a company, and that meant a lot to me because Bruce, who was the MD of Ventura when I moved to that business, was great, really supportive. He recognised he was taking a sort of an IT manager, a departmental head, and giving him a board role, and it was a big stretch. And he put that pastoral care and that support around me. But what I recognised was he'd always been an open and honest leader. So when I'd seen him stand in front of people, and he was a brilliant orator, and Ventura had at its height 12,000 people, and it's hard to control that. Our IT department at its height had 350 people, so it was a big organisation. Software developers, technologists. So having that confidence that you weren't trying to keep things from people and telling them which hill we were going to go for and then delivering the plan for that was really important to me. So I guess my aspiration came from, I want to be part of that decision-making process. I want to have a voice. And because I am ambitious, and so I would never want to just resign myself to, I'm just going to do this, because I'm not happy unless I'm aiming for the next thing. Yeah. And that doesn't need to be a bigger job, it needs to be a different job or a broader job. It's why I started doing non-exec work, it's why I started doing charity work. But I just wanted to keep that progression going.
I think what you said on there and kind of the openness of it is, and I think there's a huge amount of frustration in, you see it when you speak to people who are working in different companies and things like that, and the frustration comes from a lack of information, or a lack of understanding, and lack of understanding usually comes from a lack of information. And I can definitely say, I think, when we worked together at Epiphany, is one of the biggest fond memories I've got is the culture that Epiphany had.
I think that openness is,
and that's where it came from.
Yeah, there's an adage, and a lot of agencies use it now, that culture beats strategy. And it does. You can have the best plan in the world, but if you've got culture first, and you've got a team of people who are absolutely behind you because you've all got a shared purpose, you'll find a way of achieving something. I think the best companies have always managed to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely something we're trying to replicate here, but I think Chino will tell me if.
If I believe in that. Yeah.
It is key. It is key. And it's an interesting one. So go on to the next business, Ventura. So Ventura was a call centre business. Contact centres across the north. We started building them in India. I used to work 1 week in 4 building call centres in India. So great opportunity for me to grow again. I went because their biggest client was O2, which was BT Cellnet at the time. And so I worked in their telecoms division, worked my way up, eventually became IT director there. And that cultural thing, going from the board down to the most junior member of staff, I can remember we were pitching for Sainsbury's, and we wanted to run the call centres that answered the 0800 number on products at Sainsbury's if you needed to know whether it had nuts in it or anything like that. So it was a big tender process, and one of the procurement people who came to our offices down in the Dearne Valley in Rotherham she'd been in all the meetings, we'd done all the fancy tap dancing and all the pitching, went outside to a car and had a flat tyre. And she just started to start working on this tyre. Guy walks across, he's just finishing his shift, working in the call centre as an operator, walks by, can I help you with that? And just as you would do as a person who's got a good value system, just helped. And he was engaging and he was friendly and he was confident, and it just stuck with that person that we hadn't sent someone out to do it. It was just that we believed in doing the right thing. And the same that as you're building your agency, it's a long time before you're at a scale where you've got a reception and an office manager and a receptionist, which means that when your clients come into your office space, they're going to meet everybody. And they pick up on what you say the culture is, and what other people demonstrate the culture is going to be. And if you can't have that coherence, it sticks out eventually. And if you can get it right, everybody is part of it and kind of pushes it. So moved to Ventura, got my first board level role, loved being part of that strategy, ran a huge team. We built some of the biggest software systems in the country. 1/3 of O2 customers were on our mobile billing platform. If you've got a student loan, there's a 1 in 3 chance it was on the system that we built. If you go to B&Q and use their time credit card, it was on the system that we built. But we were the best kept secret because we had this huge technology function, but what we were famous for was running contact centres. And typically what would happen is our clients who we were running the call centres for would also have failed IT projects, and we'd come in and fix them. Go, well, we can fix you a billing system for that, and we can sort that. And I loved that. So we built some really big technology things. Obviously, being ambitious, if I've got a board role, I now want a managing director's role.
Yeah.
Never going to get it in the call centre industry, because the most important person around the table next to the managing director is the operations director. So I might have 300 staff, he's got 11,000 staff.
Yeah.
And realistically, he has the most important opinion in the business because we live and breathe by those people doing a good job.
So how did you, at that point then, realise that there was that ceiling in that industry?
I think it was quite apparent, sat round the boardroom table, where the power was. And It was not, and this was back in the day where the IT director was actually lucky to be on the main board. A lot of them, there'll be an IT manager and he can report into the operations director, but we don't need you at the boardroom table.
Right, okay.
And it's interesting, you hear that same conversation now with CIOs for the chief information officer. It's like information's important now, and maybe that person needs a board role. Does your CMO need a board role because your business is going to live or die by its ability to bring new people in? And so at that point, technology was never the most important thing. And I could see there was no career path for me to do it. And actually within that organisation, the step for me to go from the technology director to the managing director was far too much. I wouldn't have employed me to do that kind of a role. I didn't have the experience to be able to do it.
Did you know that at the time? Or
No, and the good thing was, and it's a thing about having really strong, supportive boards, is one of my friends who was the ops director, he knew it as well. I was the last person to be appointed to board. And over time, there was a change in managing director. I didn't particularly get on with the other guy, and I don't mind sharing this story because I very much doubt he'll ever watch this. But we'd have weekly board meetings on a Thursday morning, and the MD would sit to my right hand side. My mate, who was the ops director, would sit directly in front of me, and I hadn't realised, and it's interesting from a psychology point of view, I was more and more not buying into this guy's story. He just, from the previous guy that was completely open and really visionary, we just did not get on. What I didn't realise was that just shone in my body language and the way I portrayed myself. I have an absolute resting bitch face. If I am not smiling or talking, I have a pretty much off face, and I have to be aware of that. And this guy who was the ops director...
The good news is I'm just remembering all those pictures that we've been together in the past, and I'm trying to remember if you had a resting bitch face.
Well, as long as I'm talking, I'm okay. If I'm on, I'm on. And we came out of a board meeting one day and he pulled me to one side and went, "Rob, you're going to have to do something about it because you're actually distracting me now." I went, "What do you mean?" He said, "Every time the MD talks, you sit there and you just shake your head. You didn't even realise you didn't." Now, fortunately, he couldn't see me because I was sat to the side of him and said, "You don't buy into this guy and you're going to have to decide, are you going to change? Do you think you can get behind him? You need to go and do something else. And you need to do it because you're now causing me a problem, because I'm looking there and thinking, you're not on the bus. Are you going to be part of this or not?" So it was a great wake-up call for me from someone who's a good friend and still is to this day. It's like, yeah, do you know what? I needed that that shaking. So I had the opportunity to move to Latitude, which was the point at which I moved into digital marketing. And part of the reason for that was obviously online marketing was starting to go through this absolute turbocharge of a move. This was 2006, 2007. Paid search was the new in vogue thing. SEO was coming up on the outside, but it was still very, very much misunderstood. And so I had the chance to become the technology director, the CTO of Latitude. Latitude was the fastest growing full service digital marketing agency at the time. And I worked out that sat around that boardroom table, the technology guy is really important. The understanding of technology. We had our own paid search management tool called Cobra, which we built. The technology implications of understanding websites and what that meant for SEO, that was a really important voice around the table. So I joined as CTO. I eventually took over the operations as well. And then we launched a thing called Latitude White, which was digital marketing for SMEs, which was a market that no one could crack. Google couldn't work out how to deal with SMEs. Google would give everybody just enough rope to hang themselves, that here's AdWords and you can run some advertising, but you can also burn thousands of pounds really quickly, which for a small business was absolutely disastrous for them. And so we created Latitude White, which was a scalable way of running their campaigns, but still with practitioners sat behind it. And so I became the managing director of Latitude White. It was the first time I got my MD's role. And I loved having something that was my baby. And my team around me, interestingly, every member of that initial team now runs their own search agency. Absolutely every one of them. And they've gone on to do some brilliant things. But again, we knew what we were trying to do, right? We're starting from nothing.
Do you mind if I ask all the names? Where of that? Can you say it?
You've got Martin Cousins, who runs Bank in Manchester. You've got James and I'm going to embarrass us there, and Andy, who runs Salience.
If you don't remember.
No, it's fine. But people who could feel that ambition, they could feel that they were at the start of something early. And Latitude was another organisation that got culture right, that everyone was bought into. If you look at that point of Latitude through sort of 2006 to 2008. And interestingly, one of the team photos came up on my timeline. I would say 30% of the workforce now has their own agency, because we just built that ambition for them. And these are big agencies, and some of them still work for me. Andy Heaps came from Latitude. So
I suppose they were literally on the cusp of the online marketing revolution.
The timing was amazing for us, absolutely amazing. And we built that, we grew that, and we set it up to sell. And that was when I'd started to get a much better understanding of how to buy and sell companies. And I found that really interesting, not just because, yes, personally you can do very well out of it, but it was a way of getting new growth, acquiring things, selling things to become part of something bigger. So we grew it. When we sold it to private equity. We made a terrible choice for private equity. We went with the wrong people. It just was not a good cultural fit. Right. And none of us enjoyed it. So we did really well out of it. The company was bought for a really, really high price. I wasn't the chief exec at the time. A mate of mine was, Dylan. But he didn't get on board with the private equity people. He'd never really had a boss before. He hadn't worked in that environment. And there was just friction constantly. So the board just slowly started to disperse. And that was the point at which I met Shane and Robin, who Epiphany had only been going, I think, under 2 years. There was 20, maybe 25 people there. I can still remember it. I got an answering machine message left for me by Robin. I'd never heard of Epiphany before. And I got this answering machine saying, "Hi, it's Robin from Epiphany Search. I'd really be keen to talk to you." And at that point, I was just in the process of leaving anyway. So my CV was with a recruitment consultant. I assumed he was a recruitment consultant. So I don't think I called him back for 3 days. It's like, I don't need to speak to any more recruitment consultants.
I bet Robin like that.
Yeah. In the end, picked the phone up, went to meet Shane. They pretended that they had twice as many staff as they really had, but you fake it till you make it. And we just got on, and they had ambitions. And the whole point of me joining there was to take all of my experience from running some really big companies. Latitude was still nearly 200 people. Ventura was 12,000 people. Kingston was thousands of people. What are all the structures and controls and strategies that you need in those businesses? And is it possible to embed them really early on in the DNA of a growing business so that you never have those those pinch points when an agency gets to its 20th member of staff and its 50th member of staff and its 100th member of staff, where you suddenly see things start to creak and it's another shark that you've got to try and jump, is can you be ready for that early? So I bought into the business, and we always say, we sat around my kitchen table and we built the next 3-year plan, because we owned the business. We were accountable to no one. Yeah. We didn't have loads of debt with the bank. So if we weren't doing well, it was only ourselves that were upset about it. And we didn't feel like that would hold us to account enough. So, we've got to build a plan. We've got to have a plan that's going to be ambitious, that we'll be proud of, and we should share that plan. So we used to meet up every couple of weeks in my kitchen, develop it, refine it, share it with the team. The concept of doing whole team meetings and getting everybody together was embedded really early on in our DNA. We always used to track the growth of our business. Our first whole team meeting, and I still have a photograph of it, was sat around my desk. And it's just everyone on my screen going, right, I'll take you through this PowerPoint presentation. This is what we're going to do for the next 6 months. And then the next one, we'd moved to bigger offices. We had our own meeting room. And then the next one, we had to hire a cinema. And we would measure our scale, and you've been in front of me when I've presented before, and I've got photographs of every group I've ever presented to, and it's part of my personal story.
Still remember the first time when Panoramic came out.
Oh, absolutely.
And you managed to get one full photo without having to go too far back either.
I used to love that. More and more of those, but it was important because we could track the growth of the business. So at the very least, every 6 months, we would be back in front of everybody, normally every quarter. But it allowed us to say, do you remember that picture? That was only 3 months ago. Then you go, God, right, last 3 months. We've changed office, we've hired 15 more people, we won that client, And it just started to breed that real winning mentality. And so it's always been part of the story that we would tell. And obviously, it's a matter of record. We grew that business. We used to call it aggressive organic growth. We geared ourselves up to grow it quickly. We wanted to be part of something else. We always knew there was going to be some kind of sale process, because we had ambitions beyond just building the organic business. What we actually ended up doing is we put our entire operations board in place. So lots of other young, hungry people who wanted their next big role. And because we knew we were going through a sale process, any potential acquirer would look at the 2 original founders and go, well, you're essential. You're going to need to be here for a long period of time. And actually, at that point, they weren't involved in the day-to-day running of the business, but we needed to demonstrate it to everybody else. So Shane and Robin exited the business completely for 6 months. So that's exactly what we did. I demonstrated that the business didn't need them day-to-day to grow it. But we had really good advisors within the business, and they said, look, you've demonstrated the founders aren't critical anymore, but do you really need to sell this year? I said, well, no, we're all young, we've got plenty of time left. Well, if you could keep growing like this, I think you could do more. So actually what we did was bring Shane and Robin back into the business. Shane set up the business in Australia, Robin set up the PR business, which was Shackleton, and we grew those before we ultimately sold it to J-Wing and became part of the PLC.
Brilliant. So when, just I'd say probably to kind of wrap up kind of this section on it, but so obviously what we want to talk about a lot today is the scale up element of it.
Yeah.
And I think you've touched on it really well, as you came in at less than 20 people at Epiphany when you joined in there, and there was almost an eye to scale up very quickly.
Yep.
Apply processes and operations in that you had applied to 1,000 people businesses to a small business. At any point in there, I suppose a more accurate question would be, how did that affect kind of the actual production coming out of it? Mm-hmm. Like, everyone thinks of scaling up and processes kind of being implemented that kind of shave off a little bit of the cultural value, the personability, the nuances that make really good customer service. Is that, how did that affect it at that point?
Yeah, you're right, and it's something we were really cognizant of, is that if you put too draconian the processes in, you'll squash it. You'll lose the dynamism that the clients were buying into in the first place. So what we actually said was, look, what would this company actually need when it's the size that we want it to be, a few hundred people? Well, we'll need an HR function, we'll need a facilities function, we'll need a bigger finance function, client services, operations, central reporting. And we listed all these different roles that a really big company would have, and we divvied them up between myself, Shane, Robin and Ryan. and just said, well, for now, you're going to have to take facilities and HR, you're going to be in charge of operations, you're going to have to look at the reporting of this. And at least it meant that every person within the organisation knew who to go to if they had a question about it or they spotted a gap. So because we couldn't afford to build our overheads into that. But then the teams that were delivering the operations were responsible for helping define those structures and procedures. And what we did do was we made investment into project management functions, which actually was initially our process management. It wasn't for client projects, it was for looking at our own processes, and we mapped everything out. It's not a hard thing to do. As an analyst, it was a skill that I learned back in those days, and it still works. But we just looked at, how will we need to run this? And right now, we can do that with a spreadsheet. And do you know what? We might move that to be something slightly nicer as a Google Doc or have some alerts on it, and eventually we'll build our own system. But we just took it in little increments. But what we knew was that needs to be a really well productionized process. And then when we were, in an industry that's evolving all the time, as we were doing something new. So when we first started building creative content, and we didn't invent it, but we were one of the people who really made it famous and coming up with high quality content for search purposes that was still benefiting the client's brand. We were famous for that for quite a long time. And when we started saying that we needed that, we had no process whatsoever. We'd never done it before. We knew that the output needed to be something amazing and really high quality and link worthy, but how did you do it? And we built this job bag process. And we all sat down in rooms like this and just went, right, so step one, you would fill a form in, and that form's going to need to go to that person. What do you need? What's the minimum you need to know about it so that we can control it? And there's going to be a budget for this. And we just mapped it out. But the people who were responsible for delivering the work also had input to devising the processes. But we as the employer were also willing to invest in some overhead to do the grunt work for them. So what you're not doing is saying to a high quality SEO person, a high quality paid person, I need you to spend 20% of your time doing something that you never joined this company to work on. What I do need you to do is articulate it to someone who will take that and build the process behind it.
Makes perfect sense.
And if you get that process right, what it actually means to that person is you'll get to do more of what you really enjoy doing.
Yeah. So, it sounds very much, it is, the goal was to be able to put the processes in place so to make it as easy as possible, but almost that was the end goal, if that makes sense. So putting the process in place, that made it as easy as possible for everyone to do things and spend the time doing the work that they enjoy doing and that they're best at, rather than any admin aspects. That's the end goal. But there's no point putting that process in right at the beginning. It's still got to be an evolutionary process.
And it is that evolution. And what's interesting on reflection now, and I don't think this was truly on our minds at the time, if you really want to build an integrated agency that's doing what the client needs, where you've got a number of different skills coming together, that is even more critical. Because the client needs the comfort that I'm paying you effectively 3 different management fees here for all these different services. I need to know there is zero inefficiency within your organisation so that my fees aren't getting burned on your poor processes where you're ready to have a piece of content produced and, oh God, that hasn't even gone into the studio yet. And you've got an SEO going, well, hold on, I've got targets to hit here and I need some content that I can promote and I've got a PR team ready to start promoting it. I've got a gap. And for the kind of clients that we had the ambition to work with, they were expecting people to have thought about that in advance. And so we invested in that early. But people would understand, look, the reason we're doing all of this is because you need that result. And you can understand logically that this needs to be put in place as a foundation level thing. And I think one of our benefits were that we did embed those foundations really early on. Whereas what also happens with a lot of other agencies when they start to hit the 20, 30, 40 person mark is they realise they didn't do that, but it was okay for a while. And then you built a reputation. No one knows what's going on behind the scenes and it's like a swan and you're paddling like mad underneath, but it starts to creak and it starts to crack. And then either you just don't deliver the service for the clients, or the teams are so frustrated because they're working in such an inefficient environment that they're not getting a chance to be recognised for their skills.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Brilliant. So quick break there to cool ourselves down. It's a bit warm.
It is a bit.
So I suppose the main thing kind of like that I think people want to hear about is scaling a business. So you mentioned about joining Epiphany, which was a 20-man team at the time, coming from literally thousands of people and putting processes in place. And then I suppose it's just trying to pull out as much information from you in terms of what it takes to be able to scale a company both effectively, efficiently, not losing that quality of service, everything that kind of comes around there. I know that's a very, very broad question, but
and I guess from my experience, going back to the sort of the anecdote that I used before in terms of culture beat strategy, if you can do both, then that's your golden ticket. And I think that's what we managed to get right. Was we had a team of people who absolutely knew our plan. They knew what our ambitions were. They shared in it. We were very, very open. They could see us in the business every day, and so we had that vision, and we backed people to do it. And people accelerated quickly. You were rewarded on merit, not on time served.
I can definitely vouch for that.
Good, yeah, and it's amazing to see what you've done with all of that. And we also backed that up with some structure and plans, so that people had that confidence that I know we want to get there, but actually, I think if we implement that, I think that might work, and that they could feed into part of that culture. And I think we had a very open environment where people could be recognised for it. And before there was the concept of lunch and learn and sharing ideas, that just happened naturally because everyone was sat on the side of someone's desk going, how does that work? Can you show me that? And what was really good, and I think in all of the agencies that are continuing to do well, is where the people who are front of house in front of clients, and whether that's sales teams, whether that's business owners, whether that's a pitch team, they learn from the production teams what's new and what's different. And people want that diamond. I've always said to people, if you're meeting someone new, or you're doing a presentation, or you're doing a pitch, you've got to put diamonds in there. You've got to put certain things in what you're sharing them that they remember.
Golden nuggets.
It absolutely is, because people remember who told you that. And I've seen agencies do pitches where they've referenced our work, and you're thinking, well, we did that piece of work, and they're not saying that they did it, but they might be the one who told you, the new prospective client, about it. The client remembers that. It's like, oh God, yeah, this person told me about it.
Well, I remember Twiggy, Chris Howard.
Yeah,
brilliant human being. But he once gave me that piece of advice, which was, if you're going into a meeting, just have something in your back pocket. And I remember when we built the CRO team, I literally gave that same bit of advice, and I was like, it's not to use in a way to big yourself up or anything like that. It's there just to be able to drop
it's a gift.
Just for them to be able to go, that's interesting. And it's like, if you can get that reaction, then all of a sudden you're giving that gift. You get so much more engagement as a result.
And effectively, we created a platform for people to build their own personal brands. I can remember Chris when he was doing some of his first presentations at Internet World and at sort of EdXL, all these different events, and it was terrifying for them. But it was, well, you're an amazing expert at what you do, and I want to give you a platform. Whereas the agencies that almost create their own glass ceilings are, no, I need to be the star in this room. And we'd get to a point, and it's still the same now. I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday about it. If you've got a good enough relationship with your team, when you're in front of either a prospective client or a current client, and you're talking about how you want to do something, you will naturally bounce and riff off each other. And when that anecdote's going to come. I bet you're about to say that thing that we did for that client. And you're excited about it because it's something you worked on together and you're incredibly proud of, and that's that culture that comes through. But in terms of scaling the agencies, what you've got to be able to do is that wins, that has to be right, because you have to attract the right kind of talent that's going to flourish in that environment.
So with that, because we're obviously trying to build our own culture and all that type of stuff, I think a lot of it comes from top down, without a doubt, and a lot of it can be built quite naturally. But is there any advice that you could give anyone who's listening of kind of how to be able to cultivate that and facilitate that, so you're giving people the best opportunity to be able to do that, so they can kind of create that culture off the back of it?
Yeah, I don't think there's a one size fits all for that, because you can say you can have an open environment and the people at the top can be in the office and learning from other people, but you've got to create mechanisms for people to be able to voice their ideas. And that doesn't necessarily just mean let's get everybody together over lunch and see if someone speaks, because the smartest ideas could be in the person that really doesn't want to talk about it. But we had a thing back in the day, everyone had to write content for the website. Every single person had to write a blog post. It doesn't matter what your role was within the organisation. You could be in finance or you could be the head of the SEO team, but you had to produce something. Now, not everything got published, but it meant that you were spending some of your time contemplating things. And those people who didn't necessarily have the confidence to stand up and tell everybody could write something eloquent and amazing, and we would create an environment for them in the same way. And I learned this in my IT days, is that not everybody, in order to get promoted, needs to lead a team. It's one of the biggest mistakes. And when I was IT director back at Ventura, and we had a very large IT team, some of the best people that we had been put into management roles, and they were awful at it. They were miserable, and their teams were miserable. And the thing that made them famous, which was their technical expertise, was falling by the wayside. And so what we would also do is give people roles where they could be recognised just for their technical expertise. And you've got a senior seat at the table, but it's not measured by, you've got 5 people in your team, I've got 50 in my team, I've got a louder voice. That you've got to remove all of those barriers. And you've just got to give people an opportunity to share those ideas. I
think that's such an important point, because so many people look at career progression as management, as seniority, and things like that. And I've seen it. I've seen it in roles outside of digital as well. And some people just don't have that skill set. So I think that's a huge point.
And I think that's a key point about scaling as well, is that not everybody is a natural born leader or people manager. But it can absolutely be trained in, and you've got to spend the time doing that. So we were talking earlier about mentoring, and I've throughout my career I've mentored an awful lot of people, and a lot of what we'll be talking about is the real minutiae of what it takes to manage someone. How do you do a performance review? How do you deliver difficult feedback? How do you run a meeting? I always used to say to people, if I'm going into a meeting, I will have prepared 2 minutes more than everybody else in the meeting, and I win, because I will know more about that than anybody else. And that is often the fact that I just thought about it for 2 minutes before we walked in. But how many people walk into a meeting and they go, right, what were we here for? And it's like, that's wasted time. And you then get to influence and lead people. And it's just teaching them those practical skills, because a bad manager can just wreck your agency. And sometimes that's because that person should never have been put in a managerial role. And sometimes it's because that poor person has never been given the mechanical skills on how to motivate a team and deal with difficult human situations. And for me, that's just come because I've been working 32 years now. So I've been in enough difficult situations to learn what did work and what didn't work. In the agency world, you've got to fast track that. We can't all afford for everybody to have 30 years experience, which means for the older ones amongst us, we've got to teach it in, or we've got to bring coaches in for people.
You make a perfect example of a perfect point of specialists moving into that role. Is with the way technology has moved over the last 10 to 15 years, I saw a great Twitter announcement the other day in which someone interviewed for a job and they needed to know a specific language. They said they didn't have enough experience. They wrote the language, they created the language. Right. So they wanted someone with 4 years experience in this language. It'd only been around 1.5, it didn't exist. So with that, you're going to have people who are specialists and are going to have that skill set that no one else will have. But it's completely plausible that they've got no managerial, no working life experience to a point in which at that point you still need to make sure that pathway is still clear and open for them to go down.
And you've got to recognise that not everybody has a clearly defined career path about how I wanted to go into that role. The first year that we ever ran our grad scheme, we took on board 4 people, and we put a huge amount of effort into it, saying that this is the 12 months that they were going to spend in our business. They would be in finance and project management and SEO and PPC and absolutely everything. And so they would learn a huge amount, and at the end of it, we would try and find a permanent role for them. And at the end of the 12 months, we'd done a bit of a wrap up, and I wanted feedback because we were about to bring the next 4 grads in. And we were asking about what the degrees were. And we were expecting maths, computer science, because it was search, and we had philosophy, psychology, history, and I think it was geography. But those people didn't know that paid search was even a career path. And then they've done it, found out that it was within them. So our job was just to expose them to enough experiences, but we recruited them on personality and cultural fit within the organisation, and they were open enough to say, well, I'm willing to learn more things. It's the same for me from when I was at school. As I say, the internet literally had not been invented. So the entire industry that's pretty much defined my career wasn't around when I was at school. So when I was at school, I wanted to be an architect. I loved the idea of being an architect. I still love drawing. But my careers advisor, who was desperately trying to find positions for 16-year-old oiks in Hull, was going, yeah, architect, sounds like you might be punching a little bit above your weight there. But if you do want to do that, you'll probably need to understand about metal and stresses. So I can get you a youth training scheme program on how to weld. And even I'd worked out that was probably not going to be the best advice. But, I've got a 13-year-old daughter at the moment. She has to choose her GCSE options next year. And I'm relaxed enough to know that the career she may go into may not have been invented yet. But what I need her to be is willing to learn, confident. The fact that she loves drama, loves acting, loves film editing. I don't know whether she will ever be an actor or a director. But if I know she's confident in front of people, she can lead a team, she can motivate people, that's a life skill. That's an absolute life skill. It doesn't matter what you learn at university or what your technical understanding was, that will help you in all scenarios.
Completely agree. So putting that culture in place to scale then, so we know that's important. We know that we can kind of give people that platform because, what I'm taking away from that is once you give people that platform, then you're allowing people to drive that forward who aren't just yourself.
Because you're not scalable.
Yes.
Your team need to be able to do that. And what comes after that is some of the mechanics of running a business.
Yeah.
So we would run our business on ratios, all the way from the sales process to managing the clients. And that was absolutely recognised that what we couldn't do was crush the life out of what we did. But we absolutely knew how many telemarketing outbound calls would lead to a meeting, and how many of those meetings would lead to a pitch, and how many of those pitches would lead to signed business. So that's the inbound funnel. Yeah. And then from a delivery point of view, how many campaigns could a person run? And as search started to change and we needed more than just technical expertise or teams of link builders, and we needed content creation, well, how much work could they get through? And you had to be accountable to your clients about where the budget was going. So that's putting some of those principles in place. And we would get external advice. So we had advisors, we had part-time finance directors that could come in and tell us how much bigger companies would structure themselves. And we would use some of that management information, and we would have weekly management packs and monthly management packs. We'd have the right board meetings. Quarterly, we'd tell people how we were doing. We would show them what was going well and what needed to change, so that people could start to understand how they had a direct impact on the performance of the business. And if everybody understands the cause and effect of that, then they can just make more informed decisions. You can't get angry at someone for working in a certain way if you haven't explained to them that doing that goes against what you're trying to achieve. It's not their fault, it's your fault.
It's about making sure they understand where they fit within the process as well. Give them the autonomy to be able to do the job, but an awareness and awareness of that bigger picture.
Yeah.
If they pull this lever, that's what mean that might not mean anything in the short term for them, but it might mean something for someone else.
And if you've recruited well and you've brought the right personalities in, people will respond to that. And we've always said whenever we dropped the bar on our hiring decisions, it always came back to bite us. Because there was also an element of natural selection in any good organisation that if you're getting it right and then you're disrespectful enough to your employees because you bring someone in who's subpar, what you're actually saying to them is they're not as good as you, will you carry them? Now that's not the same as saying they're learning and I want you to support them, but if you're bringing someone in and they're substandard and you think people can get away with it, eventually they will be weeded out. And we never managed to get away with that because it was disrespectful to the team.
Completely. You mentioned a couple of points around financial directors, part-time consultancies, and kind of bringing in other expertise to actually be able to kind of inform where they're going there. So if you're speaking not only just to another agency, but any other business who's looking for that kind of scalability, what type of expert would you be recommending kind of pulling in for those type of conversations? I mean, to put it in perspective, is for us, I'm working every hour under the sun,
yep.
And I'm wearing many hats, as is kind of many of the people in the business, and that's part of our scalable growth. But we also know that we need to pull in other people to be able to advise us from a financial point of view, from an ops point of view. I know we've had talks. Is who would you be recommending people to go and pull in for to help them with that?
Yeah, I think, when you're at a certain size in the agency, what you're doing now and you're working every hour God sends should hopefully become part of the war stories of when you're bigger and more successful. And that goes with the territory. That's just, everyone's got to go through that. One of the things that happened to us was we wanted to bring a chairman in. We were still quite small, probably only 40 or 50 people. So we'll bring a chairman in because they'll have a great contact network. So we did it more from a sales mechanic than anything else because we wanted to get it on the inside track to a number of brands. And we interviewed a guy as our chairman, really, really impressive guy. And he asked us more questions than we asked him. And at the end of it, he went, you don't need a chairman. From what you're telling me right now, what you actually need is you need a full-on finance director because you're about to hit one of those wobbly points where you haven't got enough of a handle on your numbers. You've got a great person running finance who is growing, but they're still evolving. None of you can teach them how to gear the company up for rapid growth or to receive investments. You'll need external skills for that. And so he recommended a part-time finance director who could give us some of that non-exec skill. Because the best support you can get from a non-exec director is he just holds a mirror up to you.
Yeah.
And he just makes you pause for a second and go, yeah, do you know what? Even I'm not buying into this. And they're not day-to-day involved in your business, and you need that. Everybody needs that. And you can get some of that from your team, but you need to get it from someone who's gone, do you know what? I have got the grey hairs to show for this. I've done this once before and it didn't work. You might want to consider this. And when you're in it all the time, you can get swamped. I heard a speaker at a Google conference a few years ago, a British guy actually, and he was saying if you're an agency owner or a business owner, you've got to keep asking yourself, how many days a week are you working in your business and how many days a week are you working on your business? And you can't be in it all the time. Otherwise, all you'll get is the same thing over and over. You've got to have enough time to be able to step away from that and think, how's it going? I need to check in. And that's why, again, back in the Epiphany days, we would get out of the building, go and sit around my kitchen table and say, are we still on the track that we said we were going to? Because we've held ourselves accountable to all of our teams. But maybe we need some other advice. Maybe we need some new ideas for that. And I don't think anyone should be afraid. It's not a point of weakness just to say to people who've done it before, have you been through this? Have you got any tips and tricks that can fast track it? And yeah, you shouldn't be ashamed of that.
Cool, brilliant, very good. So I got engrossed there. I forgot the next question. So obviously that's the culture. That's kind of talking. What about kind of the technology side of it, and then as well, because that's obviously your background. That's kind of where you started off. But nowadays, technology is literally ingrained in everything. It's such a bigger part of life than, no offense, it was 32 years ago, but it was still big then. And it's like, how are people going to gear themselves up for setting themselves up properly from a technology point of view?
I think some of that's a mindset thing that people who I think do well in technology businesses or in digital agencies are willing to reinvent themselves. Search is a perfect example of what you knew yesterday will not necessarily guarantee you success tomorrow. And you have to have that test and learn mentality. You have to have that real engineering mentality that says, right, that scientific mentality. I need to try something new. Something's changed. There's a book about called Who Moved My Cheese, and it's really it's only a short book, but it's about how you can deal with change and how comfortable you are in that environment. And we are in an industry where change is a constant. And actually, most businesses are. It's whether they're willing to accept it. So from a technology point of view, what you've got to recognize is this will work for me today. It will do what I need. It may be a point of differentiation, but I can't guarantee that will be the same forever, unless you are a pure technology company, in which case it is the product. Whereas in our industry, it's an enabler to an outcome. So what you've got to be is relaxed enough to be able to go and see a client and say, that technology we've been using for the last 3 years, it's knocked it out the park for you. You trust me now. And my recommendation is it's time to change. And that's where you're having a conversation with your clients and your customers about the outcome, not the method. I always used to use the analogy about if we as an industry spend too long telling people how we're going to do it, and our client don't care. They want to know whether we can achieve the results. And it's the same with going to visit a carpenter and him going, do you want to see my hammer? Do you want to see my chisel? But he doesn't. He says, have you seen the table I made? Look at this. And that's what you're bothered about. You're bothered about the output. I don't care what's in his toolkit. and trust that he is the expert in doing that. And you've got to get to a relationship with your clients where they trust that's your decision. What do you think is going to work? And it's for you to be constantly technology agnostic, looking for the next thing that's going to do the right work for your clients. And then it's not the be all and end all.
That makes perfect sense. And I suppose it's what you were saying earlier when you said it's about knowing what the outcome is and putting in an evolutionary mindset to be able to get there. Like you said, test and learn.
Yeah.
Is, this is great. This is great today. It might not be great tomorrow, depending on X, Y, Z.
Yeah, we're not in charge of. We work in an industry where we don't hold all the pieces, and we're trying to advise our clients how to get the best results in a constantly moving landscape. And that can be how the search engines are working, how the technology is working, or just what the competitors are doing differently. Even if all the technology was a constant and the way the algorithm worked was a constant, the clients are constantly changing. There is so much other movement there, and so you've got to be comfortable to keep tearing things up and starting from scratch.
So off the back of that then is technology is obviously one aspect, but processes. So we know I'm a big fan of processes in a lot of ways, but at the same point is I hate being bogged down by them. Is how do you go about getting processes in place to make sure that, so I suppose one big problem we've got with scaling up is, you might have the best person in the world come in and be able to deliver a service. And that's great, but how can you, be confident and guarantee that actually if that person's got now a team of 10 behind them, that every single person within that is going to continue to deliver that standard? Some form of process has to be put in place to make sure that is how would you go about installing that from a scalable point of view?
As I said earlier, you've got to have those people involved in designing the processes in the first place. You've got to invest in having someone to think about it and implement it professionally. But you've also got to recognise the sheer practicality of we're ambitious and we want to grow as a business. And it's not going to work if you're only going to do it your way. So you just have to recognise that, because successful companies have always had to put some level of structure and control around it. If you want to be professional, if you want to be amateur night and fly by the seat of your pants, that's fine. But this probably might not be the business for you.
Yeah.
And it's whether they buy into that ambition for where you want to get to, or they just want to be a two-man band as a consultant doing it their own way. That's great, but you need to set your stall out with people early. And as long as they can see that it's being done to allow them more time to do what they enjoy, not less, then I think that's fine. Timesheets are a brilliant example. People do need to fill in timesheets so you can find out whether the work is going in the right direction. But the moment that timesheet is this laborious piece of work that, let's be honest, everybody leaves until a Friday afternoon, and then technically it's an invalid exercise anyway because the data that's being input is not true, then you've lost. So you need to make it as light and fleet of foot as you possibly can. But hopefully people will recognise, if you explain it to them openly, the reason we're doing this is so that we can actually bill our clients appropriately. And when we bill our clients, we get money that pays you. You like getting paid, right? Right, let's do more of that. And it's just being open.
Yeah, exactly. It comes exactly back to openness. Is if you don't show people how that information is being used, then people will always, timesheets have got horrible
stigma,
perfectly put, is if you show them actually, this is how we're using this data. From that, we can see that actually, we're spending exactly the amount of time on this client as we should, and this is the outcome of it. And that's why we do it. If you start to show them how it's being used, then you get that openness, you get that buy-in.
Completely.
So again, completely agree. Processes in place to allow structured growth. Is at what point do processes become a hindrance? Do you think they become a hindrance?
I think they can do if you don't check yourself. The danger is that some people who design processes believe that they're doing it because that's the end game, whereas good process people recognise that their job is to grease the wheels and make things more efficient, not just to document processes to the nth degree. And it's why we've never gone for any of the ISO accreditations, because it felt like it was too much work that could have been spent on something that would take us forwards. So you need to get people who are good with people, like I used to be as an analyst, and doing it for the right reasons. So yes, you can get that analysis paralysis if you put too much work into it. But you should be able to check that, because if you're leading the business and someone's coming to you to say, do you know what, I'm now spending more time filling this form in than I am doing that work for that client. Well, the client's not paying you to fill the form in. They're paying you to do the work. So it's an immediate alarm bell.
Completely. Yeah. It's process is only a cog within the bigger machine.
Yeah.
It's got to evolve. You've got to know exactly where you want to, and if it helps you get there for the right reasons, great. But it's definitely got to be evolved.
And we're looking. There are an abundance of tools that are out there now that are low barrier to entry, subscription based, pretty efficient, that also enable co-working. We've got loads of people now that are not in the office working from home, so technology is not a problem to allow people to do that. All you have to do is just configure the lightest version you can so that people can use it as a tool to help them.
We're obviously in the middle of a pandemic. There's been a lot of businesses affected, positively, negatively. There'll be a lot of people where plans have kind of been disrupted. So this may have been their year, their growth year, their year they really wanted to kind of scale up. What advice would you be giving to those businesses out there at the moment?
I think for a lot of companies, it's holding your nerve. I think a lot of the companies that are, from an agency point of view, some are doing well, some are struggling. It's not necessarily a matter of their own choice. A lot of it just comes down to where are your clients. If you were heavily exposed to the travel sector right now, you're getting kicked all over the place, and no one would have predicted that was going to be a challenge. If you are in home crafts, DIY, gardening, then you're probably flying right now, and as an agency you'll be doing well. The most important thing is making sure you're getting the basics right. Is, have you got enough cash in the bank? Have you taken the difficult decisions early for the greater good for the long term? And then hold your nerve and do the right thing. It's unfortunate that some agencies might not survive through no fault of their own. You can't mandate for that. The best businesses will make the tough decisions early, and they'll weather the storm. And those will be some of the ones that will also take that external advice. We're entering into a recessionary time. A lot of the agencies weren't around at the time of previous recessions, so you need experience of what do I need to worry about. I'm going to have problems with my payment terms. I'm going to have problems with new business. Things are going to slow down. Which bits should I be putting my time into at the moment? There's a lot of external reports that are being published right now into, I think EY did one recently, what are the sectors that will probably be least affected? The smart agencies will be gearing themselves up. I need more clients in that sector, and right now less clients in others.
So, can't disagree with any of that. Is if you were prior to this, is what would you be doing to try and scale up and create to make sure that you are more robust? Is things like coronavirus you cannot prepare for. It's literally a black swan event. Is what would you be looking to do or implement as part of your scale up plan to make you as robust as you can for this?
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic bullet for this, and some of it is the business basics of, what level of overheads are you carrying, and is that appropriate to the size of the business? Are the plans that you've got in place, even in challenging times, realistic, or are you dreaming that you think you can win your way out of this and that there'll be a constant stream of new business coming in? And some agencies will be able to do that, but you've got to plan for the worst and hope for the best. So it's taking a deep look at your numbers, and this is where your accountants and your finance people come into their own, and let them say, right, here's the risks. There's 3 areas here where we've got a problem. What can we do to try and mitigate them? And some of that is in your levels of staffing, in the overheads, in the kind of contracts that you had with clients. We're in an industry where you've got clients typically on retainers. But let's be honest, the moment the pandemic hit in March, contracts are going out the window, and it's down to, do you back us to come back? And if you do, I need the flexibility. And those agencies that have been able to be flexible with their clients, I think are being repaid now by very appreciative clients. In the same way with their teams, those agencies that have dealt with their people well during this time, when everyone has had all of that fear around employment, but have had all of that fear around lifestyle and health. None of us have been through something like this before, that makes you really think about, what do I want out of life? And those employers that have dealt with that well will engender huge loyalty from their teams, and those who haven't done it quite so well will see that exodus of staff. And actually what I'm seeing at the moment from sitting in on a few seminars is that a lot of people have had an opportunity to reflect because they've been at home thinking, what do I want out of life? Yeah. What do I want out of the next 5 or 6 years? And this will be an opportunity where some people either double down and say, I think I've been coasting in this role. I want more. I'm ambitious. I want you to give me more opportunities. And other people will go, this isn't for me and I need to change. I've had a bit of a wake-up call. And so I think there will be an awful lot of movement in companies generally and in agencies specifically as we start to come out of this over the next few months. So yeah, I expect to see an awful lot of moves.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think one thing that I've pulled out with a lot of what you said kind of today is that expert kind of advice. And, you know, I'm kind of, don't know whether I'm kind of poking a little bit, but it very much feels like there's kind of a knowledge of yourself that you need to know in terms of where your weaknesses are and things like that. So, you know, was there any point in which that you learned that lesson specifically? Or is that just kind of, you know, experience that you've got from the time?
I think if you've got either good business partners, good mentors, or even good family members that can hold that mirror up, they are the ones that in a very constructive way will start to demonstrate to you maybe that's not your strongest suit. And typically what I've seen is people who've done well in business are cognizant of those limitations and have found ways of overcoming them. And that's not always becoming a different person. It's saying, do you know what? I'm not good at that. So I am not a whiz at reading a balance sheet and drawing a conclusion from it. My mind is not wired like that. So I've always made sure that in any senior role that I've had, there is someone who is good at that I absolutely trust their judgment. So that when we get new news, they can look at it and go, the thing you need to worry about from this, Rob, is that. Don't worry about the rest, I'll take care of it, but you need to be aware of this. And so it's just understanding what your weaknesses are. And mentors, advisors, or as I say, just family members that are willing to tell you how it is are extremely valuable in that situation. And successful people are the ones who are willing to take some of that feedback on board.
Brilliant. And that's a really nice way to end that one as well.
Awesome.
Last one then is, and we can touch on the kind of it, is just your opinion of Hull at the moment, I suppose. You know, you've come from Ideal Standard, which is quite a well-known company within Hull. I think at one point I played for their rugby team in the past.
Right.
Easy to divert into a conversation now, I'm not going to. But obviously you've moved away as part of your career. Mm-hmm. From a tech and from a digital point of view, what's your opinion on Hull and the digital scene there at the moment?
As I say, one of the things that made me have to look for another role was that there wasn't enough opportunity for me here. It's been great to see, and you guys are demonstrating it, that actually you can grow businesses and that the scene is growing and that there are more agencies around here. I think that always starts with investing in talent. And, you know, ours is an industry that is difficult to do a degree course in and learn all of the skills. So what you do need is enough employers willing to take bright young things on and teach them how our industry works. So I think the more we can do that, the more we as sort of agency owners interact with the universities and further education, the better. So, you know, it's great for me. My family is still in Hull, so I'm still here on a regular basis, but it's still growing. It's still ambitious. You know, we did City of Culture a few years ago, and, you know, we were very fortunate to be involved in a lot of the work on that. And it was brilliant because it just demonstrated our ambition. And it gave us a bigger platform for it. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit continues. And more you're seeing people come out of school or university wanting to take these roles. And our job as business owners is to create as much opportunity as we can do.
So is there a point there then that kind of, not necessarily just for Hull, but in general, is create better pathways into digital as kind of a role? As you mentioned, there isn't, you know, a degree course that fits perfectly from, you know, I've got a background in psychology. I remember people who have a background in mathematics, you know, so there's lots of skill sets and subject knowledge that can be applied to digital. Does more need to be done in general as an industry to create those pathways in?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, unfortunately, with what we've been through this year with the pandemic, it is going to cause a problem for new graduates just finding roles because everybody's finding it tough at the moment. But our job is to go out there and educate. And, you know, I love going, and I've historically done a few presentations at universities or judged events at universities. And it's brilliant because everybody wants to know about the world of work and what the opportunities are out there. Same with work experience. You know, when we've worked together in the past, you've seen us constantly have people going through work experience. I can still remember when I did my work experience at a company called Radius in Hull, which is a technology business. And I was in their IT department in the basement, learning how to wire computers and did a little bit of program. I can still remember it. And what I actually learned from that was not the technical side of it, but what it meant to go into reception and give them your name and get taken to a department and having a lunch break and all. What it's like in the world of work is the great unknown, and we need to do more work to demonstrate to people how you make a success of your first role. And all we have to do is get out and tell people about it. And from what I've seen, further education establishments are more than willing to open the students up to let you do that. It's giving them those diamonds, dropping those golden nuggets in there.
And creating that platform as well. It's like you said right at the beginning when we was talking, is creating an environment that actually teaches those people those work-life skills.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You can't expect people in an industry that's still relatively young in the age of working history, it's still very young, so we're still very much focused on the skill set that an individual can bring, whether they're a technical SEO or whether they're a paid search specialist, we're still very much focused on that technical ability.
Yeah.
We need to be making sure, as an industry, we're actually bringing people into a career pathway and teaching them that work life behind it as well.
It is, because no one automatically knows that. I can remember when I bought my very first house. I had no concept of how do you buy a house? What are the mechanics of buying a house? No one teaches me that. And once you've done it once, you understand the mechanic. It's the same thing. If you can go to any hotel in the world and you pretty much know how it's going to work. You're going to walk in through the doors and you'll either turn left or turn right. There'll probably be a desk of people. And if you go there and give them your name, they'll give you a key and you'll get in a room. No one taught you that. You did it once and you picked it up. Well, the world of work is exactly the same. You need to understand what the working environment is. And that's not just how you turn up that day, but it's how you interact with colleagues and how you build those personal relationships. And that is a skill, and it needs to be taught to people. And you need to be accommodating in your early parts of your career when you get that wrong. I think of some of the things that I was doing when I was a programmer at Ideal Standard or at Kingston Communications, and I'm 18, 19, 20 years old, and I'm still rough around the edges, and I'm thinking, God, my boss was so accommodating to me when I used to do some daft things or say stupid things or turn up to work wearing stupid clothes that weren't professionally enough. And they didn't bollock me for it, but they went, you might want to just think about doing this next time. So yeah, that's a great lesson. And good bosses do that naturally, and they don't make you feel bad about it.
Completely agree. So with Hull then, so obviously Hull Uni is a fantastic establishment. It's where I did my undergraduate. We've got Leeds literally 60 miles down the road, which is obviously a huge digital centre. It's I moved that way to kind of expand my career, and I know that you did exactly the same. So what does Hull need to be doing now to be able to kind of compete and recognise itself on the digital landscape for that?
I think...
We're not putting you on the spot.
No, I think that what that actually comes down to is it sits on shoulders like yours. There's got to be the employment opportunities for people not to have to go to the next city along. Leeds is always going to be a natural draw. And if you're in Leeds, there's always a draw to Manchester or down to London. So that's a reality. There's just got to be more opportunity. What the last 4 months has demonstrated to us is that you don't have to be able to be in the same office 5 days a week all of the time to do well. I think the office environment is still incredibly important. It's where people learn from each other. The last 4 months have demonstrated we can keep the handle turning on industry. It doesn't mean it necessarily got better or more junior people learn, because they need to be surrounded by others. So offices are a great place to galvanise that culture, but it doesn't mean you need to be there 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So I think there is more opportunity for people to have roles in these organisations, but not necessarily live in the same city all of the time. So I'm hoping it creates more of a globalised workforce, and we should just be more accommodating of that.
Brilliant. Cool. Thank you. Last, everyone wants to know kind of what's next for Rob Shaw.
I'm still on gardening leave. I'm actually doing some work on my garden. I'm kind of getting bored of it now. I will be back doing something fairly soon. My biggest takeaway from time at home is I just want to do things that I enjoy doing with people that I like, because life's too short not to do anything else. and all of the people that I know that enjoy the careers. And I like working. While I have been working 32 years, I turned 50 on Saturday. I've still got. Thank you very much, mate. I've still got plenty of career left in me, and so I want to spend that time enjoying things. The biggest thing I take away from the time that I've had is the roles that I've created and the opportunities that I've created, and that's what gets me excited. And so, building agencies and developing businesses, the biggest recognition or enjoyment I get from that is the outcome, which is seeing something grow, and that growth creates new jobs and it creates success for our clients, and so that makes me happy. So doing that with people that I like will be my absolute focus.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For joining us. And that legacy that you're talking about there is, I've got to thank you for the impact they've had on my career.
Bless you.
Because otherwise we wouldn't be here today.
It's great to see what you're doing, mate. It really is.
Thank you very much, Rob.